be 4 years old, and last Thanksgiving. My father stood up at the head of the table, raised his glass, and told me I was getting nothing. Around me, my family clapped. Actually clapped, while he announced he was selling our 3-generation building supply business for $50 million. Then he said the buyer's name out loud, proud as a rooster, rolling it around his mouth like good bourbon, and I sat there with my hands folded in my lap because I was the only person at that table who knew whose signature was on the other side of that deal. Everyone in my family remembers what I said next. It's become the story they tell in 2 counties. But here's what none of them knows. The part that mattered didn't happen at Thanksgiving. It happened 22 days later, in a room with no turkey, 3 lawyers, and a single folded piece of paper I slid across a table. And what that piece of paper cost me is the real story. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally tell the stories their families hoped would stay buried. If you've ever been written off at your own family's table, passed over, talked over, told to go help in the kitchen, this one is for you. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. To picture what $50 million was actually buying, you have to see a hardware store in Millbrook, Ohio in 1998 through the eyes of a 6-year-old sitting on the counter. Thornton Building Supply. My grandfather Earl opened the first store on Main Street in 1962 with a loan he paid off in nickels. By the time I came along, there were 6 stores and a lumber yard, and the whole town smelled faintly of sawdust because of us. I grew up behind that counter. I counted washers into paper bags before I could read, learned margins before long division because Grandpa Earl taught math with a price gun, and when the register came up short, it was me he handed the tape to, age 9, because his words were, Wendy finds it. She always finds it. He taught me to read a spirit level that same year, holding his old aluminum one steady on the workbench, an $11 tool he'd bought in 1962 and trusted more than most men. You watch the bubble, he said. People would tell you a shelf is straight, a deal is fair, a man is honest. The bubble never lies. I loved that store the way other girls loved horses. I knew every aisle, every vendor rep's coffee order, every squeak in the floor by the paint counter. By 9, I could balance the register on the first pass. It took me 25 more years to learn what I could never balance, no matter how many times I ran the tape. And it wasn't in the drawer. It was standing at the end of the counter in a canvas work apron, teaching my brother to drive the forklift with his back to me. Nobody in my family ever said out loud that the store would go to my brother. They didn't have to. It was said in 100 quieter ways. The way small towns say everything. When Dale turned 12, Dad took him on delivery runs to learn the ropes. When I turned 12, Dad told me I was getting good at keeping things nice and sent me upstairs to help Mom with the church rummage boxes. Dale got a name tag, I got a compliment. Dale broke the pallet jack, and it was part of learning. I reorganized the entire fastener aisle by thread size one summer, and Dad walked through it, nodded once, and asked Dale if he'd eaten. There was a schedule board in the back of the warehouse. A big whiteboard grid with every employee's name down the side. Full-timers, part-timers. The high school kid who swept on Saturdays. Everyone who belonged to the store was on that board. In 20 years, through every summer, I worked there for free. My name was never written on it. Not once! I used to stand in the warehouse and look at that grid the way other people look at family photos they're not in. And I want to be fair, because fair matters to me. My father was never cruel. He never mocked me, never raised his voice at me, never once made me cry at that counter. He did something quieter. And I'd argue, more expensive. He exempted me from the work, from the wait, from the will, from all of it. Like a tax I was too pretty to pay. He genuinely believed that was love. It would take me almost 30 years and a lawyer's conference room in December to understand what it actually was. The year I turned 25, the store started dying. A Home Depot went up 20 minutes away in Riverton, and you could watch our parking lot thin out month by month like a hairline. Dad's answer was to work harder at the same things. Open, earlier, sweep cleaner, trust the loyalty of contractors who were already quietly opening accounts at the big box. I had just finished my MBA at night. 3 years of classes after full days doing the store's books, which by then I was doing unpaid and unlisted, like a ghost with a calculator, and I did the thing hopeful daughters do. I wrote a plan. 30 pages. I still remember the sections. Shift. The business from walk-in retail to contractor delivery. Signer. The builders on subscription accounts. Put the inventory on actual software instead of Dale's. Memory. Use the lumberyard as a distribution hub for 3 counties. I printed it at the library and bound it with a black spine and put it on my father's desk on a Tuesday in April, and I stood there while he read it. The way you stand for a verdict. He read 3 pages, maybe 4. Then he squared the edges, set it down on the blotter, and looked at me with something close to kindness, which is the part I've never forgiven. And he said, "Hardware isn't for girls, Wendy." Then he asked if I could run lunch out to Dale at the yard. I don't remember driving the sandwiches over. I remember Dale eating them on a stack of treated lumber, talking about a truck he wanted. Within a year, I was gone. Columbus, 90 minutes, and one entire universe down the interstate. The plan stayed behind on his desk. To this day, I couldn't tell you what happened to those 30 pages. But hold that thought, because it comes back. I moved to Columbus with $12,000 in savings, a laptop with a cracked lid, and a theory. If my father wouldn't run his supply chain on software, other men's fathers might. I named the company Everest Holdings, and I'll tell you the embarrassing truth about the name. It wasn't ambition. It came from a night in the store when I was little, when Grandpa Earl looked at a misstacked delivery towering by the dock and said, "Somebody's got to climb that mountain, and it's always us." Everest builds inventory and delivery software for building suppliers and contractors. In other words, I sold my father's rejected 30 pages, one feature at a time, to every hardware man in the Midwest except him. The first year I made almost nothing and slept in the office twice a week. The 5th year, we passed 100 employees. By last year, we were in 1,100 supply houses across 30 states, and I still drove a 9-year-old truck because money never was the point, and spending it felt like admitting something. Here's the part I'm less proud of. I built that company like a fortress. No partners with real power. No mentors. No one close enough to tell me no. My chief financial officer once said, not unkindly, that I ran Everest like a woman who'd been robbed once and now slept on top of the safe. I told him that was ridiculous. Then I went home to a house I'd bought alone, ate dinner alone, and reviewed the quarter alone, feeling perfectly safe and perfectly certain that needing people was a weakness. I'd been smart to cut out early. If nobody's allowed to help you, nobody gets to refuse you. That was my arithmetic. For 9 years, it added up beautifully, right up until the teaser landed in our deals. Inbox. You should know what my family and I were to each other by then, because it wasn't estrangement exactly. It was something politer and sadder. My mother, Caroline, called every Sunday at 4, and we talked about her tomatoes and my weather, never the store by unspoken treaty. I drove up to Millbrook twice a year Easter and Thanksgiving, and sat at the far end of the table like a well-dressed roomer. Dale was vice president of operations by then, a title Dad invented for him, the way you'd hang a medal on a boy for attending. He'd gotten louder with age. His wife, Krista, had a gift for compliments with a hook in them. Look at you, Wendy, still so busy. Some people bring casseroles, and some people bring ambition. I brought pie and said little. What I noticed on those visits was the store bleeding. You can dress a company up for family dinner, same as a person. The empty end caps, the vendor reps who stopped coming. 2 registers dark on a Saturday. I noticed Dale's new truck too, and I did quiet math I kept to myself. Then one Sunday in August, in the middle of the tomato report, my mother lowered her voice, like the kitchen had ears, and said, "Your dad met some men in suits on Tuesday, at the store after." Close. I said something soothing and got off the phone, and sat very still. My mother thought it was bankers, and feared it. I ran a software company that served 400 supply houses in Ohio alone, and I knew the difference between bankers and brokers. Somebody wasn't borrowing money to save the store. Somebody was measuring it for a casket. The teaser arrived in Everest's acquisitions inbox on a Thursday in September. That's how these things work. When a business goes up for sale quietly, the broker sends a 2-page anonymous summary to a list of likely buyers. No company name, just numbers and a code name. This one was called Project Timber, Regional Building Supply Chain, 6 retail locations plus lumber yard. Roughly $85 million in annual revenue, 40 employees, founder-owned, motivated seller. Strategics, buyers in vertical software were on the list, which is how it came to us. I read 2 lines of it and knew every squeak in its flaws. You don't forget the shape of your own childhood, even redacted. Grant Ellison, my head of acquisitions, walked in with the same pages and said, "This one's in your backyard, boss. Worth a look." And I heard myself say, in a voice I didn't fully recognize, "Yes, but I stay off the calls. Here's where I owe you honesty, because this is the hinge of everything." I told Grant it was standard practice. Anonymity keeps negotiations clean, keeps the seller from playing games with the price. That's true. Brokers run confidential deals every day of the week, but that's not why I did it. I hid my name because a hidden name can't be handed back. If my father knew who was reaching for the store, he could do to the offer what he did to the 30 pages. Square its edges, set it down, send it out for sandwiches. Anonymous. I couldn't be refused. That was the fortress logic again, and I mistook it, as always, for professionalism. So Everest signed the NDA, bid through a company called Acquisition LLC, and somewhere in Millbrook, my father started telling my mother things were finally turning around. Neither of them had any idea. We were not the only bidder, but we were the only serious one. A supply chain bleeding customers in a county with a Home Depot is not a bidding war. It's a rescue negotiation. Grant's team did it clean, $50 million, a number I set personally and defended against my own analysts, who wanted to open at $41 million. They called the premium irrational, called it strategic geography, and closed the discussion because the chairman gets to do that, and because none of them knew they were pricing my grandfather's front door. In the middle of November, the letter of intent was signed. Non-binding. That matters later, so file it away. But signed. My father shook Grant's hand across a conference table in Dayton, and Grant told me afterward. He gripped it hard. He said, "Tell your people they're buying the best run yard in Ohio." The best yard in Ohio. Even then, selling, he was still grading his own paper. That night, my mother called off schedule A Tuesday. Her voice had bells in it. You're coming for Thanksgiving. Please say yes. Your dad has news. Good news. Honey, the first good news in years. He's been walking around whistling. I said yes. I hung up. And I sat in my kitchen in Columbus for a long time, with my tea going cold, turning over the strangest, stupidest, most human thought I'd had in 9 years. He sounds proud. I wonder who he thinks he's proud of. Some part of me, the part that still owned a 9-year-old's ears, genuinely believed that somehow, at that table, the pride might land on me. You can build a company in 30 states and still drive 90 minutes north, hoping for a pat on the head. I set the table for it and everything. Before I walk you into that dining room, if you've ever sat at a table where your chair was a courtesy, where you were family in the photos, but staff in the decisions, tell me in the comments where you were sitting, when you figured it out, and subscribe, because what my father announced over the turkey is only the third most shocking thing that happens in this story. Now, Thanksgiving, my parents' house in Millbrook, the good tablecloth, people. My mother had been cooking since Tuesday, and it showed. My father had been rehearsing since the letter of intent, and that showed too. He wore a collared shirt. At his own table, he kept touching his water, glass and not drinking. Dale arrived loud in a new coat, with the swagger of a man who has seen a number with 7 zeros, and believes some of them are his. Krista praised my dress like an insurance adjuster, and said it was brave. The little cousins watched football. Aunt Lou brought her famous rolls. It could have been any Thanksgiving from the last 30 years. If the air hadn't been humming like a power line. I knew what was coming, of course. I'd known for 11 days, ever since a signature page crossed my desk with my father's name on it. Above the line, Seller, in the blue fountain ink he's used my whole life. I'd decided, coldly, professionally, the way I decided everything back then, to say nothing at dinner, let him announce, let the deal close in January. Tell the family afterward, gently through lawyers and letters, once nothing could be squared up and set down. And refused. That was the plan, and I wanted on the record that I walked in that door intending to keep it. The same way I want on the record that plans made by the fortress only survive until somebody fires at the gate. My father stood up between the turkey and the pie and tapped his glass with his wedding ring twice. Family, he said, I have an announcement. My mother reached for his hand. He didn't notice. I've made a decision about the business. We're selling. It's done. Papers are moving. $50 million. The number landed on that table like a flock of birds. Aunt Lou actually gasped. Dale was on his feet before the echo died, whooping, pumping Dad's hand. And Krista's eyes went bright and quick. Already spending, my mother said, Frank, in a small voice, and got no further. Because my father wasn't finished, he turned to me, and I watched him gather himself up the way he did the day of the 30s. Pages. That same terrible kindness settling over his face like weather. And he said, Wendy, I want to say this to you plain in front of everybody, so there are no lawyers and no whispering. Later, the proceeds go to the people who built this business. Your brother put in the years. You left. He paused, and the pause was worse than the sentence. You're getting nothing. Dale clapped. He clapped. Krista lifted her glass and said something about how honesty was refreshing. And down the table, my mother's spoon slipped out of her fingers and rang against her plate like a small bell, and nobody picked it up. I sat. Still, I'd like to tell you the calm was strength. It wasn't. Not yet. It was arithmetic failing. I had $50. million committed on paper to this man, and the sentence, "You're getting nothing," was still doing to my chest exactly what it would have done when I was 9. That's the thing nobody tells you about. Wounds like this. You can outrun the will. You can outbuild the store. You cannot out-earn a father's arithmetic. You can only stop being a line in it. I didn't know that yet. I unfolded my napkin, smoothed it flat, and asked my question. "Dad," I said, and my voice came out level, which surprised me more than anyone. Who is the buyer? It was the one question nobody at that table had thought to ask. They'd all jumped straight from $50 million to what it meant for them. Not one of them had wondered whose money it was. My father straightened. This was the part he'd been rehearsing. I could tell because he set his shoulders the way he did for the Rotary Club. "Outfit out of Columbus," he said. "Software people, if you can believe it, big. They've been buying up the industry." He let it build, savoring it, the salesman's pause of a man who has waited 3 bad years to feel impressive at his own table. Everest Holdings, they're paying $50 million and then I'll give him this. He added the line that made it art. They know a well-run operation when they see one. Around the table, the name meant nothing. Dale nodded like a man hearing a sports score. Krista mouthed Everest. At her wine, my mother was still looking at her dropped spoon, and I sat at the far end with my hands in my lap, feeling something enormous and very quiet rearrange itself in my chest, blood in my ears like surf, because here is what I knew, and the turkey didn't. There is no outside board at Everest Holdings. There's a chairman who owns the controlling stake, who signs what she chooses to sign, whose name stays off the deal calls as a matter of practice. I had 90 seconds, maybe less, to choose between the plan, smile, say congratulations, tell them in January through lawyers, and the truth. My father picked up his glass. "To the buyer," he said, beaming, "whoever they are." "Well," he asked, "Dad," I said into the toast, "I am Everest Holdings." There is a specific quality to the silence that follows a sentence like that, and I've had a year to find the words for it. It's the silence of a room. Recalculating. 11 people. 11 abacuses. All the beads sliding at once. Dale laughed first. One bark, the laugh of a man declining a fact. "Good one." "When?" I didn't answer him. I kept my eyes on my father, who had not moved, whose glass was still raised like a man frozen mid-career, and I said it again, slower, the way you read numbers to the bank. "Everest Holdings is my company. Dad, I founded it 9 years ago. I own it." Acquisition. That's my signature. Your broker has been carrying it to Dayton. Krista had her phone out by then, thumbs blurring, and I watched her find it, the company site, the little corporate bio page we'd always kept deliberately. Gray founder and chairman, W. Thornton. She didn't say anything. She just turned the phone toward Dale, and Dale stopped, being loud for the first time in my adult life. His face did something complicated. Disbelief, then belief, then math. The $50 million, the whooping, the toast, all of it rerouting through the sister he'd clapped at. My mother put her hand over her mouth, and above it, her eyes were doing something I couldn't read yet. It would take me weeks to name it, and when I did, it would break my heart a little. She looked like a woman watching a collision she'd been bracing for since 1998, and my father lowered his glass 1 inch at a time. Then he said the sentence I will be quoting to therapists for the rest of my life. Not how, not when, not why. He looked at his daughter, chairman of the company, paying him $50 million, and he said quietly, "Is this a joke you bought?" As if the only way I could hold something this size was as a prank. As if even now, the largest check of his life couldn't have a girl's name on it. Nobody ate the pie. My father left his own table before the coffee, and the front door clicked. The porch light stayed off. I found him the next morning at the store. Of course, the store was closed for the holiday, but his truck was out front like always. The side door was unlocked. He was in the back warehouse under the old fluorescent lights, standing at Earl's workbench with his coffee going cold on the vise. He didn't turn around when my boots crossed the concrete. For a while, we just stood there. Two people who had never once, in 34 years, had the conversation we were about to not have. On the pegboard above the bench, the schedule board still hung. Same grid, new. Names. The high school kid who sweeps on. Saturdays. My name still wasn't on it. Some. Things stay. Level forever. Then my father reached into the drawer of the workbench, the shallow one that sticks, and took out my grandfather's spirit level. Aluminum, dented at one end. The little window gone honeycombed with age. He held it out flat on both. Pame's like something ceremonial. Your grandfather paid $11 for this in 1962, he said. Everything square in this building got squared with it. 60 years. Every shelf, every door frame, every addition. I reached for it. I couldn't help it. My hands moved on their own and he drew it back. Not sharply, gently, which was worse. I'm showing you, he said. Not giving. He set it back in the drawer and slid the drawer shut. The stick of the wood was the only sound in the building. $50 million, he said to the workbench, and you couldn't come to me with your own name. And the terrible thing, the thing I chewed on for the whole 90-minute drive back to Columbus, was that he wasn't entirely wrong about that. He'd refused my name for 25 years. I'd stopped offering it somewhere between his sin and mine. An $11 tool sat in a stuck drawer, waiting to find out which of us could read it. Monday morning, my father called his broker and told him to find another buyer. Harrowy, a decent man with an indecent job, called Grant. Grant walked into my office with the look pilots get when an engine light comes on. The seller is entertaining a competing offer, Grant said in deal voice, and then, in human voice, Wendy, he'd rather take less money from strangers. The strangers had a name. Corstone Partners, out of Chicago. If you've never met a liquidation firm, count your blessings. Corstone doesn't buy businesses. It buys carcasses and sells the cuts. Their offer came together with insulting speed. $46 million, $4 million less than mine. And their plan wasn't a secret because plans like theirs never are. Sell the real estate under 4 of the 6 stores. Close them, keep the lumber yard and the delivery contracts, and right-size the workforce, which is a phrase that should be illegal. 40 employees. I'd grown up underfoot of half of them. Miss Doy at the paint counter, who kept butterscotch in her smock for me before I could see over it. Ray in the yard, 29 years, who taught Dale the forklift, and taught me too, in quietly after close, because I asked and Dale didn't. Under Corstone's math, most of them had 18 months, and my father, man who knew every one of their kids' names, was willing to sign it, because the alternative was endorsing a check with his daughter's name behind it. He would rather see it die in a stranger's hands than live in his daughter's. He never said those words. He said it in broker language. Exploring. Strategic alternatives. Same sentence. That was the week this stopped being a family story and became something with civilians in it. Whatever I felt about my father, Miss Doi hadn't done anything to anybody except trust the name on the sign. I taped her butterscotch wrapper. I still had one. Don't ask. To the corner of my monitor and told Grant we weren't withdrawing. Due diligence is the unglamorous heart of any acquisition. Your accountants crawl through the seller's numbers to confirm the business is what the brochure says. In the first week of December, ours found the hole. Melanie from our deal team flagged it first. Vendor balances that didn't reconcile against the aging report the broker had provided. She pulled thread after thread. And what unspooled was this: 4.1 million in past due supplier debt that appeared nowhere in the seller's financials. Invoices shuffled between entities. Credit extensions signed quietly with vendors. Extensions with my brother's signature on them, because 2 years ago, when Dad's eyes got bad, he'd handed Dale the books. It wasn't embezzlement. Dale hadn't pocketed a dime. It was worse in a way. It was a drowning man hiding the water. Every quarter, the store sank deeper, and every quarter Dale smiled at. Sunday dinner, and told Dad the yard was turning around. Then he signed another quiet extension and moved the whole one column over. I sat with that folder, alone in my office, until the cleaning crew came through. Understand what was in my hands, disclose the debt, and it would detonate both deals. Corestone would slash their offer or walk, and Sue, my father, would learn his heir, had cooked the family books. Dale could face fraud claims from 2 directions. Read out loud in the right room. That folder would hand me the store at a crawl space price and hand my father a humiliation so total he'd never grade another paper of mine again. Leverage, real, legal, documented leverage. The exact currency my family had traded in my whole life. Secrets held quietly, spent at the right moment. For one long night, I sat with a folder that could end the war in an afternoon. All I had to do was read it out loud. Quick pause because I want this on your conscience. 2. That folder is still in my safe. Before you find out what I did with it, tell me in the comments what you would have done. Read it to the room, or slide it across the table. Your answer says more about your family than mine. And subscribe if you haven't, because the next 20 minutes of this story cost me more than the $50 million. Now, the folder wasn't my only problem. Everest is mine. But $18 million of the deal money wasn't. It came from a growth fund that had backed us for years. Patient money. Professional money. And professional money reads due diligence reports. The Monday after Melanie's findings went into the data room. The fund called a meeting. It had exactly one agenda item, delivered by a man named Whitfield, who wears his glasses on his forehead. So you know he's serious. We're not paying $50 million for a company with a $4 million hole. Nobody's saying is. Their terms for staying in were simple. Cut the offer to $41 million and commit to closing 3 of the 6 stores. The underperformers, meaning Main Street first. I looked at their term sheet, and honest to God, for a second, I admired it. It was Corstone's plan wearing our logo. Same surgery, better bedside manner. And that's when I finally understood the shape of the trap. I'd built myself into every rational path to owning my family's store, and every path ran through gutting it, through doing to Miss Doi and Ray precisely what I was spending $50 million to prevent. The want was eating itself. Win like a buyer, lose the store, walk like a daughter, lose it, too. I told Whitfield I'd consider the terms, which was a lie I delivered in fluent, chairman, and I drove home with his term sheet on the passenger seat, like a hitchhiker. I regretted picking up my house. Was dark when I got there. Big.tasteful.paid. 4 dark fortresses usually are. I called Whitfield back Wednesday morning and declined. He was gracious about it. The way surgeons are gracious. Then we're out. Wendy, this is a rescue, not a deal. And we don't fund rescues. By Friday, the paperwork was signed, and $18 million stood up from my table and put on its coat. Grant sat across from me in the empty conference room afterward and asked the same question. Do we walk? And I told him the truth for the first time in the entire transaction. Not strategic geography, not vertical integration. I told him about the counter, the register tape, the schedule board, the 30-page plan, and the spirit level in a stuck drawer. And Grant, who has negotiated against sharks and cried at zero of it, listened all the way through. Then he said quietly, "You know this deal stopped making sense 2 weeks ago." And I said, "It stopped being a deal the day he said I built none of it," which wasn't an answer. And we both knew it. It was a diagnosis. Here is what I can tell you from the far side. There is a moment in every long grief where you have to decide whether you're finishing something because it's right or because the 9-year-old holding the register tape won't. Let go of your sleeve. I couldn't tell the difference yet. Standing in that conference room with $18 million gone, a liquidator circling, and a folder in my safe that could end everything. I genuinely could not tell, so I did what people like me do when we can't answer the big question. I answered, a small one instead. Could the deal still close without the fund? Yes, if I bet the fortress, which brings us to the 10th of December and the worst signature of my life. Almost the worst, second worst. Before the signature, the visitor, on the 8th of December, my assistant buzzed to say, "Dale Thornton is in the lobby. No appointment." My brother had never once in 9 years come to Columbus. He looked wrong in my building. Too big for the chair, coat still on, eyes doing inventory of the place, like a man pricing what his sister's life must have cost. I want to tell you he came to apologize. What he actually did was close the door, sit down across from me, and negotiate. He knew what our accountants had found. Of course he knew. He'd watched the document requests circle his own signatures for a week like gulls, and his offer, stripped of 40 minutes of sweating and family loyalty speeches, was this. I keep quiet about the $4.1 million, and in exchange, he works on Dad, gets him to drop Corestone, and lets me buy the store. I can deliver him, Dale said, actually leaning back, actually recovering a little swagger. He listens to me. That's worth something, right? My brother was selling me our father's ear, priced in silence. And here's what I felt watching him. Not rage. Recognition! He was drowning exactly the way the store was drowning. Quietly, respectably. Moving the whole one column over, because he'd been handed a thing he never earned by a man who confused handing with love. And he'd spent 2 years lying, rather than say the one sentence that could have saved him. I can't do this. In my family, you'd sooner drown. I said no. Both halves, no to the silence, and no, for now, to exposing him, which confused him badly. Then what do you want? He asked, and for once in his loud life, he sounded 9 years old too. I told him the truth. For it to end clean, Dale, one of us has to stop playing the family game. Watch me. On the 10th of December, in Ruth Calloway's office on the 14th floor, I signed a personal guarantee, plain English, to replace the funds, $18 million. I borrowed against everything. That was actually mine. My controlling shares in Everest and the house in Columbus, the first thing I ever bought that no one could take back. If the deal closed and the store recovered, fine. If it didn't, The bank owned my fortress. Both meanings. Ruth, who has the warmth of a staple gun and the loyalty of one too, made me read every page aloud, which is her way of making sure clients hear themselves. Halfway through the collateral schedule, my phone lit up on the table. Mom, I watched it ring itself out, kept reading, signed. Then I called her back from the parking garage, sitting in my truck with the engine off, and she was crying before she got a sentence finished. Your father hasn't slept since Thanksgiving. He walks the house at 3 hours in the morning. Wendy, he keeps saying he'd rather bury that store than hand it over. Bury it to your own daughter. Who says that? A man following his level. I didn't say. A man squaring a shelf with the only tool he was ever given. I told her it would be over, soon, one way or the other, which comforted neither of us. And after she hung up, I sat in the concrete, dark for a while, doing the honest math, the house, the shares, the folder, the liquidator, the 19th of December. There was no version left where I could shrug and go back to my life. My life was now collateral, listed by address in a document I'd read out loud in my own voice. Everything was on the table, but the one thing I'd wanted on it since I was 9 was still waiting. My father's approval.